I'm ready now.
Then I shall get to hacking.
What does it mean to be good? For some, goodness is a divine imperative, clearly defined and beyond reproach. For others, it is a matter of circumstance, relative to an individual's perspective, but not to Aristotle. He believed that goodness was an intrinsic part of the human condition, something that we are all capable of recognizing in others and achieving with nothing more than our God-given features. Goodness, then, is not mandated. It's not even dependent on anything outside your control. Goodness, or virtue rather, is a matter of choice, but with all the comforts afforded to us by human ingenuity, past and present, all the conveniences that we take for granted, and all the external factors that make being a good person less appetizing, why should we strive to be better if nothing is motivating us to?
Why greatness? Why is goodness not enough?
Aristotle's idea of virtue ethics is a simple one. Live a good life for the satisfaction of a good life lived. Eudaimonia, as he puts it. Remember that virtue ethics frames goodness as a choice. It also posits that true fulfillment can only be achieved from within, not by the accolades or praise of your peers and not by the material wealth you gain in the process, but by knowing the effort you put in and relishing in the toil. Virtue is something you understand and are capable of achieving by virtue of being human. In this framework, the role models, or rather moral exemplars, are those who embody virtue to the nth degree, individuals who do not succumb to the vices of excess or deficiency, but live in the moral middle ground, pursuing the virtue of moderation, the golden mean. I'll admit, the logistics of this worldview seem rather vague, but that didn't stop an entire school of thought from forming around the idea of being virtuous for virtue's sake. Enter Stoicism, a collection of ideas that speak to something profound and deeply ingrained in the human experience. Read a Stoic quote from hundreds or even thousands of years ago and understand that that knowledge transcends time, place, and cultural disposition. Stoics believed that eudaimonia could be achieved by anyone doing what they were good at to the best of their ability for their whole lives. Stability, gratitude, discipline, courage, wisdom. These are a few words that scratch the surface of what Stoicism represents. Much like virtue ethics, Stoicism is a choice. And funnily enough, Stoicism is all about making your own choices, not just independently, anyone can do that, but making choices deliberately, with forethought, accepting challenges with vigor, and greeting the consequences with a smile. It is no surprise, then, that some of history's greatest warriors, strategists, and rulers embodied the virtues of Stoicism. The Spartans, Marcus Aurelius, Sun Tzu, Miyamoto Musashi, and the list goes on. One historical faction that doesn't immediately come to mind when thinking of Stoicism is, oddly enough, medieval knights. But as David Lowery's film The Green Knight demonstrates and explores, knighthood and the Stoic concept of virtue are deeply intertwined. The Green Knight is an adaptation of the Arthurian legend of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. An adaptation in the truest sense of the word. This film is both darker and more cynical than its source material and, from all available references in the film and out, ends on a less hopeful note. While the film certainly does justice to the original tale, it transforms the main character and his trials in such a way that is arguably more in keeping with the theme of knighthood. We open to a voiceover, assuring us that this is not the story of King Arthur, and oh how true that is. Then cut to a still shot of a burning building in the background with a man and woman making haste for reasons unbeknown to us. A clever misdirect. This is not the story of King Arthur. This isn't even the story of that swordsman. No, he is acting, taking charge in an attempt to gain control of his circumstances. That is not Gawain. This is Gawain, a boy who spent the night before Christmas at a brothel with his peasant mistress. He replies to his mother's criticism with irreverence, as though never disciplined in the ways of a knight, but then takes a seat in King Arthur's court for their Christmas celebration. The king even welcomes Gawain to sit at his side for the festivities, asking him to regale Guinevere and himself with a tale of his. But Gawain has no tales to tell. Yet, his nurturing aunt reassures him. On repeat viewings, something else becomes clear at this point. Not only is this not King Arthur's story, this is not King Arthur's time. That has passed. The time of knights, duty-bound and chivalrous, is no more. This is the aftermath, an empire diseased by the fruits of its labor. The prosperity that Arthur and his knights sowed for Camelot has reaped a generation who want for nothing and so try for nothing. Gawain is nephew to the king, heir to the throne, yet the virtues of knighthood are as foreign a concept to him as the suffering his ancestors endured to give him the comforts in which he so merrily indulges. As legend has it, Morgan Le Fay sees fit to use the festivities to stage a test for the Knights of the Round Table. The difference being that in the film, Morgan Le Fay is Gawain's mother, and in the legend, the test serves as a lesson for Gawain, showing him the error of his ways and allowing him to live a more virtuous life moving forward, albeit with a scar to remind him of the flaws that he and all heroes possess. The film does not tell that story. The king rises from his throne to deliver a speech to his court, thanking and commending them for fostering the prosperity they now enjoy. Arthur affirms his gratitude while Morgan, absent from the celebration, concludes the Green Knight's summoning ritual. Having written the letter he hands to King Arthur herself, it would seem that the Christmas game and Gawain's ensuing trials on the road to the Green Chapel were all Morgan's doing. Many of the film's details are left up for deliberation, but if the legend has any bearing on this retelling, then it is her intention to test the valor of Arthur's knights, and the first test begins now. The Green Knight challenges the court to a game. Any man brave enough may strike the knight however he sees fit, but must be prepared to take the same strike in return 1 year later. The letter explicitly mentions a nick on the cheek as a valid option, but such a trivial detail would be easy to overlook in the heat of the moment. And in the heat of the moment is when Gawain sees the opportunity to forge a legend of his own. Take a moment to evaluate the situation from Gawain's perspective. Having grown up surrounded by men of honor and status with stories of their accomplishments made general knowledge, Gawain has lived in the shadows of others his whole life. With no wars to fight and no enemies to conquer, he has not had the opportunity, let alone the incentive, to earn the knighthood.
Get up.
I'm not ready.
Year after year of comfortable living has made Gawain soft, and he knows it. A tale of adventure, to a knight, is not just a story, it's proof of worth. Evidence that a man did something to earn the respect of his peers in court. Arthur and Guinevere want Gawain to have a tale to tell, not for their entertainment but for Gawain's personal fulfillment. He sees the Green Knight's game as his time to shine. Just moments ago, he was invited to sit at his uncle, the king's side. He is surrounded by friends and family, handed Excalibur itself to dispatch of the intruder. A better environment in which to test one's mettle would be hard to find, and Gawain feels the pressure. He accepts the challenge with gusto. Arthur reminds him that it is only a game. But it's too late. Gawain is in over his head. The adrenaline rush of having the chance to prove himself to his king and his entire court be handed to him on a silver platter has clouded his judgment. He does not understand the rules, which permit a blow as harsh as a stab or as minor as a superficial cut, and which require an appointment at a distant location 1 year later. If Gawain were aware of the rules of the game, this story would have ended quite differently. The Green Knight, as testing as Morgan could hope for, kneels and presents his neck to Gawain. He hesitates, looking to the crowd as though for permission.
Never forget what happened here!
With the blow eventually dealt, Arthur's demeanor shifts immediately. He knows what the boy has done, but what's worse is that he probably knows that Gawain doesn't know what he's done. The Green Knight's body moves to retrieve the now severed head, and Ralph Ineson demonstrates why he was chosen for this role.
1 year hence.
The terms have been set, a covenant made. Gawain has 1 year to prepare for his journey to the Green Chapel. He does not spend it wisely.
Why hold me to this light? Is it wrong to want greatness for you?
Over the ensuing months, word spreads quickly of Gawain's triumph over the Green Knight. His reputation comes to precede him, a level of status which could easily be more of a burden than a boon. Gawain was a normal guy up until the Christmas game. Now, with the expectation of greatness thrust upon him, his character is being tested for what seems to be the first time in his life. Essel, his mistress, is excited by the whole affair. No doubt she saw Gawain as a man of worth before, but now she gets to see him come into his own. Only there is an unfortunate conflict of interest at play. He is highborn and she is a commoner. In a flashback, we see a rather one-sided conversation between the lovers. Essel is desperate to know if Gawain will remain loyal to her once he has honor and knighthood. She is content with material possessions. What she longs for is Gawain's heart. But he's too cowardly to say anything. He's not even brave enough to deny her request, knowing full well the interclass dynamic at play. She is a peasant, he is to become a knight. Maybe he longs for her too and laments their circumstances, or maybe he was only ever stringing her along for his amusement. Either way, his commitment to her is no commitment at all. Gawain is a layabout, a sluggard, a malingerer, a member of Arthur's court but not up to par, arrogant and complacent but tacitly admitting he's not ready. Guinevere tells Gawain not to take his place among the other knights idly, which is exactly what he's been doing. Additionally, there is a noticeable disconnect between Gawain's understanding of honor and Arthur's. They speak the same word and invoke the same sentiment, but we are given little in the way of elaboration. From the few references we do have to work with, it appears that Gawain's entire outlook on honor is warped.
Surely your knights have spilt enough blood in your name to bind them closer to you than I.
This is the product of learning about the virtues of knighthood second-hand. Gawain has confused violence for valor, precisely what the Green Knight was testing by exposing the nape of his neck as soon as the Christmas game began. Arthur, on the other hand, has a far more stoic perception of honor. He doesn't demand that Gawain face up to the Green Knight's challenge as to avoid bringing shame to their court. He wants Gawain to live up to his potential. And although there is no such reasoning given in the film, there need not be any explanation deeper than the reality that Gawain has potential and so naturally has a responsibility to live up to it. Late into his travels, after having come across a magnificent castle and befriending the lord and lady of the house, Gawain gives us another glimpse into his mind's eye. This time with the benefit of someone who can challenge his perspective. Lord Bertilac asks Gawain what he hopes to gain from facing the Green Knight, and he replies, uncertainly so, honor. Gawain wants to live a life of honor. The Lord asks if defeating the Green Knight is all it takes to achieve that. Gawain says that it is. The Lord questions this line of thinking.
You do this one thing. You return home a changed man, an honorable man. Just like that.
Gawain affirms that that is the case, demonstrating his naivety once more, well into his adventure after having gone through a series of trials that one would think would have adjusted his attitude. With an entire year of prep time wasted and days of anguish and confusion behind him, Gawain's immaturity persists.
I mean, a knight like you could spare a wretch like me just a small act of kindness.
Here, a kindness.
May the Blessed Virgin keep your 5 fingers strong, your 5 senses sharp, and the 5 virtues of a knight light your way. Keep thy covenant, young Gawain.
Gawain does not embody the 5 virtues of knighthood. A knight is generous, but when a scavenger asks Gawain for a token, he offers little. A knight is courteous, but when Winifred asks a favor of Gawain, he asks what he might gain in return for his service. A knight is amiable, but when a friendly giant extends his hand towards Gawain, he flinches, and when Lord Bertilac offers him a friendly game, he refuses to comply and flees. A knight is pious, but Gawain spent his Christmas Eve at a brothel. A knight is chaste, but when seduced by Lady Bertilac, he succumbs and accepts the green belt of invulnerability. Some of those connections may seem more tenuous than others, but on its face, Gawain's journey is designed to test him. The first chapter on his quest, A Kindness, sees our hero crossing a battlefield when a scavenger pesters him about his status and asks him for a reward for directions given.
I said, are my directions not worth anything to you?
The scavenger insists. Gawain's tone is more dismissive than generous. He only offered a single coin and didn't seem all too happy about it. This comes back to bite him when it turns out the scavenger lured him into a trap in order to rob him.
You rest your bones, my brave little knight. I'll finish your quest for you.
Suddenly, Gawain is presented with an easy way out. Stripped of all his belongings, he is offered reprieve as the thief leaves to finish his quest for him, potentially having heard the tale of the Green Knight himself. This is only the first bump on the road that he's encountered, and already, as he later admits to St. Winifred, he intends to go home. After finding shelter in an ostensibly abandoned house, Gawain is awakened by the ghost of Saint Winifred and asked if he would kindly retrieve her head for her. He desperately tries to find reason in the situation, but the confounding apparition is only concerned with keeping his eyes on the prize.
Are you real or are you a spirit?
What is the difference? I just need my head.
What would you offer me in exchange?
Why would you ask me that?
Gawain is unsure what to do, but Winifred is entirely goal-oriented. While he's still trying to puzzle out what's being tested and how he should approach the situation, the real test was his generosity and decisiveness, making this the second trial he failed. Or the third. Films like this confuse me. Like, honestly, what is up with this scene? Gawain asks a giant if he may hitch a ride on its shoulder. The giant extends what seems to be a helping hand, but our brave knight flinches, not the only time he will do so. He can't even accept aid from a giant for fear of the unknown, and before he can get his bearings, the fox intervenes, growling at the giant before howling. The giant then sings back in chorus. I have no clue what any of this means. To jump around for a bit, the fox first appears when Gawain emerges from the pond, Winifred's skull in tow, which is after he's lost his horse. It accompanies Gawain for the remainder of his journey, but is absent for his stay at Castle Bertilac, during which the crone is present to observe him. For most of his journey, Gawain either has a companion to travel with him or someone to oversee him. Since Morgan intended for the journey to test Gawain's honor, it follows that she'd want to keep tabs on him at key points in the quest. The crone may very well be Morgan in disguise, as they are the only two characters in the film to wear blindfolds. The fox's purpose seems to have been to gain Gawain's trust so that it could undermine the journey and the Covenant at the 11th hour. Just before they reach the Green Chapel, the fox promises that Gawain will have no happy ending if he continues, and that it would keep the secret if he wishes to bear his shame and return home now. Gawain claims to be the type to finish the quest honorably, so the fox points out the invulnerability belt. He asserts that it is not magical, so the fox tells him to leave it behind. He says it was a gift, so the fox assures him that there's no need for gifts where he's headed. He turns away, too ashamed to face the reality that the fox presents, and swings the axe at it when urged to go home. Yet another example of Gawain's disregard for fellowship.
I never asked for your company anyway!
With that in mind, the fox preventing the giants from giving Gawain a lift could be its way of making sure that he doesn't miss his next destination, the Bertilac's castle. The next chapter is titled An Exchange of Winnings, which is framed around Lady Bertilac's face. As we soon come to learn, there is a game to be played between Gawain and Lord Bertilac, so implying that she is a prize is no mistake. On the first night of Gawain's stay in the castle, the game the Lord proposes is as follows. He will give Gawain the best of what he hunts for the next 2 days, and Gawain must give him whatever he receives in the castle in return. But we've been here before. The stay in Castle Bertilac is Gawain's second deceptively simple test, framed as a game. The first was the Christmas game, but by this point in his journey, Gawain's mother Morgan has observed him struggle through and fail every trial so far. Maybe, however, if she presents him with another game, this time free from the pressure of spectators, he will do what is right and become the knight he... Okay, never mind, I'm getting ahead of myself. Gawain is once more confused by the simplicity of the rules. What could he possibly find in Castle Bertilac that does not already belong to the Lord? Well, that's irrelevant. The Lord will give him the best of his hunt, and Gawain must give him whatever he finds in the castle. Not difficult. I mean, until she starts getting pushy.
Why did you not come to my chambers yesterday?
The Lord goes on to comment on how the world is full of mysteries, things that bear no logic. A man's home, however, should be safe from all that. One wall joined with another, line and plumb, good strong walls, and a fire within. This implies that the castle is somehow separate from the mysterious outside world, that what happens within is somehow more grounded or true than without, but all evidence to the contrary. That crone is probably Gawain's mother, the lady looks identical to Essel, and Gawain himself is nothing but confused in here.
You are no knight.
The lady says, looking on in disappointment at Gawain's soiled hands holding the belt, which she claimed to have made. Repeatedly asking him if he wants it serves not just to test his chastity, but also his resolve as a knight. He lost that belt several trials ago, but at this point, even though he has no reason to believe that it will truly make him invincible, is still desperate to spare himself his fate at the hands of the Green Knight. Lord Bertilac catches Gawain on his way out of the castle and asks if he remembers their game. He wants nothing to do with games anymore, but that doesn't stop the Lord from taking the kiss that the lady offered Gawain in the house. That, however, is not the gift he had in mind when asking Gawain if he's certain there's nothing he'd like to give him. He was talking about the belt. But young Gawain, still misreading the rules presented to him and the situation he's trying to flee, keeps it. What could go wrong?
And what do you hope to gain from facing all of this hue?
Honor?
Are you asking me?
On his way out of Camelot, Gawain passes lumberjacks on a recently deforested field while a conversation between him and Essel plays in the background, possibly foreshadowing the speech her enigmatic counterpart delivers later on regarding the inevitability of nature. Far be it for a film from 2021 to cover man's conflict with nature in a tasteful manner, but that's what this scene is. The lady inquires as to why the night is green. Gawain suggests that he is not of this earth, but she counters that green is the color of earth. And rot, Gawain replies. The lady expounds about how we use green in everyday life, but when we dislike how nature might encroach on our comforts, we eradicate it. And yet it is green on top of which we built those comforts. It was here before us and it will be here after us. The Christmas game, then, can be said to be an allegory for the cycle of men reaping nature and prospering from it, only for nature to reap man in the end, just as the Green Knight will do to Gawain. The Green Knight did not flinch when their positions were reversed, just as trees do not flinch when we cut them down, and yet they outlast and outgrow us. There are many shots that linger on Gawain moving through nature, with forests becoming thicker and more lush the closer he gets to the Green Chapel, the furthest point from home on his journey. The cold grays and browns of Camelot are contrasted with the green and yellow of the knight's humble abode, just as Christianity is contrasted with paganism. Gawain's journey takes him to the least familiar place he could find himself, far away from his family, his god, and the comforts he took for granted. Only now that he's removed himself from the environment that coddled and emasculated him does he take responsibility for his actions and accept his fate. But not before we see a highlight reel of Gawain's future should he reject that fate. To take a step back for a moment, after Gawain's ordeal with the thieves in the woods, he's tied up and left for dead, which brings us to what is easily the most indulgent shot of the film. A drawn-out 360-degree panning shot that takes us from Gawain's agitated, restrained body around to his rotted corpse, and then, as though rewinding time, back around to the present where he eventually frees himself. Besides being extremely confusing, this shot is mirrored in Gawain's vision where, before the enraged townsfolk can storm his keep and execute him, the camera does a 360-degree pan only to stop on Gawain, who, after all the years of cowering from death, removes the green belt and dies by delayed decapitation. Death was always his fate. He could only prolong the inevitable, not escape it. Gawain spends the majority of the film dreading his encounter with the Green Knight, making him seem less of a neutral nature spirit and more of a grim reaper. In this way, the color green represents time, and the Green Knight its executioner. Both of these panning shots depict Gawain being killed by time, explicitly and implicitly, just as Lady Bertilac described.
When you go, your footprints will fill with grass. Moss shall cover your tombstone, and as the sun rises, green shall spread over all, in all its shades and hues.
The pentangle that the Knights of the Round Table wear represent the motif of 5 that Guinevere mentions, but also serve to bridge the gap between Christianity and paganism for the sake of the film's own themes and tone. This is a dark fantasy, and having what many Christians would consider a satanic pentagram worn by the typically pious knights serves to upset our understanding of the dynamics at play and remove us from our comfort zone without ever directly addressing it. They're called the 5 virtues of a knight, but are they really ideals worth striving for, or simply rules meant for the warrior class of a bygone era? Is it fair to ask so much of a young man, only to have him devote his life to doing the bidding of a monarch? Are the virtues of a knight intended to prepare a man for his life of service, or did they have more to do with the prevailing sense of morality at the time? The film explores these questions, and many more, through Gawain. When walking in the path of the giants, the camera spins around him. There go the magnificent creatures, off to who knows where to do who knows what. The giants are a mystery, and learning about them would surely mean adventure, but that's not what the story is about. Gawain's world is being turned upside down, just as our understanding of the hero archetype is being flipped on its head. The film deconstructs the knight's myth by setting the board for an epic, honorable journey for a budding knight to undergo, only for him to blunder his way through the trials laid out for him and own up to his folly mere moments before his self-inflicted demise. By accepting his death, Gawain has freed himself from the constraints of apprehension and inaction. He was arrogant and reckless, in excess of courage during the Christmas game, but devoid of courage for the rest of the film, until he accepts his death. Sure, his glory might be short-lived, but at least he didn't die the cowardly failure he envisioned. The film acknowledges that some might find this ending unsatisfactory, but it is thematically resonant.
Is this really all there is?
What else ought there be?
Gawain has two portraits of himself painted, one reimagining him as lighter-skinned and more muscular, the other essentially a primitive photograph of him. In his vision of the future, we see the sun-printed portrait of him in his throne room, but we know that history remembers him as a white man, lending credence to the idea that not only does that future not come true, but also that Gawain does not survive his quest to be able to correct the record. Morgan seems entirely sincere when promising that the belt will protect Gawain from harm, and asking that he not waste this. This could refer to the magic belt, but could also refer to the opportunity to prove himself as a knight, but in order to do so, he'll have to part with it. For all we know, the green belt of invulnerability is a gimmick. There is no evidence that it functions as advertised. Despite the thieves stripping Gawain of the belt with ease and his enduring most of his hardships without it, he still believes that it will protect him, which is Gawain's final test. To accept responsibility by accepting vulnerability. Honestly, who wouldn't welcome a fantastical quest into the unknown with promises of honor and glory upon completion if they were told they would suffer no harm? There is nothing chivalrous or brave about Gawain setting out to fulfill his covenant so long as he wears that belt. The rules were clear. In order to complete the game, he must necessarily sustain harm, a reality he is all too comfortable neglecting right up until the final moments of the film. The glory that Gawain enjoys in his vision of the future is predicated on a lie, and as long as he wears the green belt, a figurative shield from accountability, he will never have to face the music. It is only when he removes it, envisioning his future self, condemned by his own hand, that he has learned the meaning of honor. It's one thing to claim culpability and say you've learned your lesson, but it's another thing to actually face the consequences of that lesson. The game was never about defeating the Green Knight, but rather a test of Gawain's attitude in the face of certain death, whether he would cower and flee or take it like a man. Gawain's journey feels less like a journey and more like a slow, arduous realization of the horrors of manhood, a cautionary tale showcasing the gravity of virtue, a descent into the truth of what it means to achieve honor as a knight would perceive it, a deconstruction of the heroic myth and commentary on coming-of-age stories. In his final moments, Gawain does not experience the honor of which songs are sung in Camelot. There is no audience present to applaud him or record this victory, but it is a victory all the same, one that came from within.
There. Now I'm ready.